Hey everyone, we're going to give it a couple minutes just to wait for people to join, and then we'll kick off. Hey everyone, we're going to give it a couple minutes. Do you want to put on the slide for now? Just wait for people to join. Everyone, thanks for joining tonight. I'll just give it another 30 seconds or so and wait for whoever else is going to join the live session to join tonight. In the meantime, just a little bit of housekeeping. If you've got any questions as we go through, we're going to try to keep this as conversational as possible. We will respond to the comments if you want to drop them in the chat. That's pretty much all you need to know before we start getting into it. I'm just going to look over at the operator over here and just check if we're good to go. Okay, well, let's get started. As people join, we can always run through and keep going through questions. And just so you know, these sessions will get reposted to both Facebook and YouTube, so you can refer back at any point. But welcome. Oh.
How do I log into the chat? It's got like a login thing here.
Give us 1 sec just for a little tech issue here. Okay, and we're back. Welcome to my living room. My name is Graham Smith. You haven't met me before, and I'm running for the Board of Supervisors here in San Bernardino County. I live up in the mountain part of District 3. I'll spend a little bit of time talking about just how big this county and this district is. But Redlands, Highlands, Yucaipa, Mentone are all part of District 3, so it's a really, really big place. So we've got a little presentation to run through tonight, so I'm just going to get started and go through that. Like I said at the beginning, if you've got comments or questions as you go through, drop them in the chat and we'll address them as we go through, and we'll have a Q&A period right at the end. Okay, so what does a county supervisor do? I'm conscious that this isn't necessarily a household name as it relates to political positions, and it might not be front of mind for you as a voter. So I thought I'd spend a few minutes talking about exactly what the roles and responsibilities of a county supervisor are, and then how I think my professional background actually puts me in a pretty good position to apply for a job like this. So really we think of this as a few different categories: approving budget, allocating resources, approving legislation, and securing investment. Just touching briefly on each of those, the budget for San Bernardino County is about $10 billion, so it's pretty big. So you've got to have comfort dealing with large sums of money. The departments that make up San Bernardino County are also quite numerous. There are dozens of individual departments that sit within the county. So as a Board of Supervisors member, you are sitting above these county departments, figuring out how to allocate resources between all of them, and you don't necessarily need specialist knowledge of each one of these departments themselves. Approving legislation. A big part of this role is interpreting legislation that comes down from the federal government and from the state of California. So a big part of this job is being able to act quickly, respond in real time, and then figure out how to implement that legislation here. That's no easy job in a county like San Bernardino just because it's so big and we've got so many diverse areas here, but a bit more on that later. And lastly, securing investment is a really important part of this job because as a county, we get a huge proportion of our county budget through reimbursements from the state and federal government. So a huge part of this role is being able to sell the county of San Bernardino to the state of California or to the federal government and find ways to get more money. So with that as a backdrop, why don't I give you a little bit of information on my professional background. Later on in this presentation, I'll get to my personal background and why I'm doing it, but I wanted to kick off with the meat of what I used to do. So I really think of my professional career as being in two phases. I had most of my professional career I worked in big finance, and then for about 5 years I founded 2 small businesses. So in my big finance experience, I worked for 2 companies. The first was Lehman Brothers. The second is an LA-based investment manager called Ares. I'm conscious these aren't necessarily household names, but I think what's important is the roles and responsibilities I had in these jobs. So a big part of my finance career was pitching my company, pitching for investments, going out to potential funders to raise money for my company. And that's a little bit like the county raising money from the state of California, from the federal government. And then what happened is all that money got put into a company fund, and then we would go invest that money in a bunch of different businesses. And again, the way I kind of see this is those businesses are a little bit like the dozens of county departments that it has sitting within it. I was what was called a generalist, which means I didn't have a particular sector that I focused on. And a big part of my job was learning in real time. Basically, the way my job worked is a memo would land on my desk for a company and industry that I might not have heard of before. I'd have a couple days or a couple weeks to become an expert on that and figure out if that was a good allocation of funding. So again, very similar to what the Board of Supervisors does at a board level, allocating resources between the various county departments. And then I decided I didn't want to do corporate work my entire life, so I actually left that job about 5 years ago. And since then, I was working on 2 small businesses. One was a health and fitness startup, and another was a skincare brand. And I think what that did for me is it really gave me an appreciation of just how hard it is to be a small business owner and a small business founder, and also just how hard it can be here in San Bernardino County. So I'll talk about it later, but one of the big things on my agenda is finding ways to make small business easier here. So back to the role of a county supervisor and kind of tallying up what my former experience does for this job. On approving the budget, I've got my last job in total in my career. I raised and invested about $10 billion. That's about the same scale of the county budget. And the last company I worked for manages about $400 billion. So that's about 4 times the size of the GDP of San Bernardino County. So in terms of the scale and size of numbers we're talking about, I've got a lot of comfort dealing with this kind of thing. I touched before on allocating resources. This is really a big part of the county supervisor's job because we all know there is a finite amount of tax dollars the county has to spend each year, and a big part of the role is figuring out where those tax dollars should go. And really, in my professional career, it was my professional expertise figuring out how to allocate the money we had to get the best possible return on it. And in that process, it meant creating jobs, creating value, and just making things better for everybody. I touched on the fast-moving environment of approving legislation. I worked in an incredibly fast-paced environment in my professional career. I'd have days or weeks to respond to stuff, very much on the same time scale that the Board of Supervisors works on, and also very comfortable with deal language and legal language, financial documentation. This is something I've spent the better part of 15 years dealing with. So at this point in my career, I've probably negotiated tens of thousands of pages of legal documentation. So when it comes to negotiating budgets and structuring contracts, this is something I can do really, really well. And then securing investment, both from the perspective of going for resources from the state of California, from the federal government, and then also figuring out how to bring more private industry into San Bernardino County. This is a really core skill set of mine and something I can do really, really well. And I think that's going to be really important going forward because we'll touch on it later. The state of California is currently in a budget deficit, so it's going to be a really important part of this job, figuring out how to sell the state of California on San Bernardino and get as much money as we possibly can. So that's just kind of a quick intro in terms of what a county supervisor does, but let's talk a little bit about the district that we actually sit in. Okay. Yes, pausing for a question here. I'm also conscious there's a little bit of a delay, so if you've asked a question and it takes a minute to get back, apologies for that.
So, repeat question. This is from Christy. She says, I live in Highland. I'm totally blind. My husband is legally blind. What do you plan to do in the county for people with disabilities? So maybe talk about community empowerment.
Yeah, so one thing that we've been, okay. The question is, we have a resident in Highland who is legally blind, and the question is, what can be done in the county for people with disabilities? I don't have a full list of priorities just yet, but one thing I want to highlight is we had a really interesting conversation with one of the fire chiefs a couple weeks ago, talking about community paramedicine. Now, San Bernardino County is a huge county. I mean, you can see on this slide, on this map here, and oftentimes getting medical resources to people in disparate parts of the district can be really tricky. So one thing the county is trialing on a limited basis, and I'm really keen to explore, is expanded community paramedicine, where paramedics are more freely able to deliver care at home. This is just one part of the potential strategy. There's also the possibility for an expanded network of healthcare clinics across the county. We've had discussions around people who have highlighted a need for a bigger need of urgent care facilities around the district. And I think this is all something that we should really be considering, especially if we can get more resources from the state of California. So one thing you're going to hear me talk a lot about is, these issues all fall in the overall basket of what I'm going to call resource allocation. And the better job we can do raising money from the state of California, the better job we can do spending money, and quite frankly, wasting less of it, which I think is something this county's done a pretty poor job of historically, I think we'll be in a much better place. Okay, so just touching on San Bernardino County and District 3, I'm conscious that if you are in one of the cities we're talking about today, so Redlands, Highland, Mentone, you are most likely in an incorporated city in the county or very close to one. But it's a really, really big place. So San Bernardino County overall, you probably know, is the largest county in the US by geography anyway. It's 20,000 square miles. And District 3, where we all sit, is about half of the whole size of the county. And I also think it's one of the most complicated ones to manage because it's got urban areas where you're most likely sitting, mountain areas where I am, and a huge part of the region is desert. And because of that diversity, it's really important that the county doesn't take a one-size-fits-all approach to managing everything, and I think that's something we've struggled with historically. I touched on the budget of $10 billion. The biggest piece of our budget comes from reimbursements from the state of California and the federal government. So I think it's really important we try to maintain a positive relationship and do what we can to get more resources from them. And I touched on the one-size-fits-all approach. So I'll talk a bit later about the reason I'm actually running for this position. And a huge part of it has to do with the fact that because San Bernardino County is such a big place, it's really, really difficult to manage an area that's got these really diverse geographies. And what we found is a lot of residents are right now slipping through the cracks. So I want to talk a little bit about what my personal priorities are for the county overall, and then I'll talk a bit more about the local priorities I have for some of the cities in the district. And this is where I'd really love to make this as interactive as possible. So if you've got any comments, suggestions, questions as I go through, please let me know, and I'd love to discuss in real time. So in terms of the overall county that kind of sits above all of this, this is not an exhaustive list, but here are 4 things I want to talk about to get us started. It's really hard to go a couple weeks in this county without reading something in the headlines around alleged financial misconduct. There's even headlines alleging corruption in this county. I think this is all pretty well documented over the last couple of decades. And recently, we've seen money returned from the county back to the state of California because it hasn't been spent properly, and this county is constantly being sued. So I think having more financial oversight and more financial, what I'm going to call rigor and responsibility, is a huge part of the work that we need to do to, quite frankly, restore trust between not just the relationship of the residents in the county, but restore the relationship between the state and the federal government, which is another point I've got on the slide here. Diversifying our economy. This county has, in my opinion, really overinvested itself in the transport and logistics space. I'm sure if you're in Redlands or Highlands, I mean anywhere in the urban parts of District 3, people talk all the time about warehouses. They're built right in the middle of neighborhoods, and I think unfortunately, in some senses, it's too little, too late in terms of preventing further development. But there are things that I think we should be doing to lessen the impact that transport and logistics has on the county. So one thing I'm focused on doing is trying to find ways to use our dominance in transport and logistics to bring about some positive change here. And that's things like installing solar panels on warehouse roofs, which is actually something they're supposed to do already but haven't. Finding ways to electrify our heavy vehicle fleet to reduce what is currently the most polluted air in the entire country. And I want to do my part to find some other industries to bring into San Bernardino County. Because the problem is right now, transport and logistics is by far the biggest employer in this county. It's the biggest sector. And I think what's happened is we're setting ourselves up for a real area of exposure if the economy takes a dip. And this is something, if you look back through San Bernardino history, has happened plenty of times before. Whether it's a military base closing or it's a rail yard closing, there have been big times of boom and bust here, and I think we're on the cusp of another tough time for San Bernardino if we don't start to diversify our economy. Okay.
Question on that. Again, repeat question. Is it possible to quote someone like Apple to bring in an Apple store in Redlands? This is from Brian. We have multiple schools in the area and the company Esri. It would be great for innovation to get more tech.
So the question is, could we court a company like Apple to bring in an Apple store in Redlands, to bring in more tech to the district? Absolutely. I mean, I think we need to be courting a lot of different industries and trying to diversify our economy as much as possible. If I think about San Bernardino with my old investor hat on, I kind of the expression I like to use in terms of what we're doing right now is we're putting all our eggs in one basket. We're putting all of our eggs in the transport and logistics basket. I think we need to do our part to explore other industries, entice both big companies and small business to come to San Bernardino County. I mean, small business is also a huge area of focus for me, just because in District 3 in particular, we live in so many parts of this district are rural, and small business is a really important part of the community. And at a county level anyway, the county makes it pretty difficult right now. So I have both big business and small business experience through my previous professional network. I've got access to both the $400 billion of capital that my old employer manages, and through a professional network, I've got access to trillions of dollars of private companies. So in terms of being able to attract more businesses here, I think by far I'm the most well-placed candidate in terms of being able to open those doors and have those discussions. So I'd like to do as much of that as possible. Okay, just moving on quickly here, we've got the relationship with the state and the federal government. I think right now this is at an all-time low. You might have voted on it, you might have even missed it. In the last election, the Board of Supervisors put a measure to study secession from the state of California on the budget. This is really done as a way to try to get more resources from the state of California. I personally think this was a misguided way of doing so because San Bernardino County has got about a $110 billion economy. That's about 3% of California's economy. And threatening to secede is kind of an empty threat, just because we're such a small portion of California's total economy. So what I want to do is focus on finding positive ways to engage with the state of California and the federal government. I've got a few ideas on how to do that. I mean, one thing I'd especially encourage you to do, if you don't already, is follow the campaign on social media because we talk about this stuff a lot. But I think we've got a big job to do to start repairing this relationship. And a big part of my previous career was relationship building. So even though I haven't necessarily been in public politics yet, this is something I know I can do pretty well.
We have a question that relates to what we said before. This is from Robert in Redlands, who says, how do you see balancing small town charm with bringing those businesses like Apple to the area? So like big corporate, coming in, how do we balance maintaining small town charm?
Yeah, so the question is, how do you balance small town charm with big business, particularly in an area like Redlands? First of all, I think Redlands, as I look across the district, I think Redlands has done an excellent job of that. You've got companies like Esri headquartered in Redlands, which are huge global corporations, but you still have the Old Town and a huge amount of really vibrant small business community. And I think part of this comes down to both smart zoning and also just working closely with local city councils and residents to figure out what they want. I think a big problem we've got as it relates to this county is just quite frankly the county and the Board of Supervisors not really listening to residents and not taking into account local feedback. We have a point here on municipal advisory committees, and this is a little bit less relevant for you guys as a broadly incorporated audience. But when you get to more rural parts of the county, we've got a few across District 3 right now where you basically have a committee of local residents who are really there to provide feedback, be a conduit between the local community and the county. And what's happened is some of these MACs that used to be in existence have since been disbanded. And I think it's really important that we expand this network as much as possible, really under the guise of building the trust back between residents and the county and listening exactly to what people have to say. And I think I'll talk a bit more on my personal why for running for this seat, but I've got a pretty good base of experience now in terms of being a resident that I'm going to call unloved, not personally, but my area being unloved by the county. So I've got a lot of personal motivation here to make this relationship work as well as it possibly can. And that's not just for my mountain community, it's for all of our communities across District 3 because I really can empathize with how it feels to be an unloved citizen here. So I'm going to move on to some local priorities that I've kind of identified from spending a bunch of time talking to residents in areas like Redlands and Highlands. And this is certainly one where I'd love to get some more feedback from you guys in the comments and see what's on your mind. But warehouses we've talked about a little bit already. My agenda here is I want to at least get up to scratch on the regulations that the South Coast Air Quality Management District stipulates as it relates to solar panels and warehouse roofs. If you do the back of the envelope math, basically if you cover even half of the warehouse square footage in the Inland Empire with solar panels, you cover the entire need of San Bernardino's electricity for a year. So one thing that I like to think about and talk about is really imagining if San Bernardino County can become a big net exporter of clean energy, because we've got a huge amount of space that's been disturbed already, like warehouse roofs, the I-15 corridor. So there's a lot of room to build renewable energy projects without even disturbing any natural landscape. And again, if I think about what are ways for us to increase our visibility with the state of California, really to attract more industry here, That's something I really want to explore because these are well-paying, highly skilled jobs, oftentimes unionized jobs that aren't getting replaced by robots anytime soon. By the way, I think that's also a big risk we have with the warehouse space is, again, it's by far the biggest employment sector in the county, and these are jobs that are the very first in line to get replaced with automated technology. So I want us all to think about a scenario in the next 5 years where maybe 100,000 people in this county are out of work, and then what that looks like for all of us. I think it's a pretty dire picture. Okay, we've got a question here.
Sorry, comment, not so much a question. This is just from Robert, who asked about the small town charm. He just makes the point that Esri grew up in Redlands, and it'll be interesting to see how other businesses integrate themselves into the area. Just want to mention that.
Yeah. Okay. The point. I mean, I'm sure if you're on the, I don't know which platform this was on, but the comment is around Esri growing up in Redlands and kind of growing up with the city. So how do you keep the small town charm when you attract bigger businesses? I agree. This is something that I think we all need to have front of mind as we're courting some of these industries. And this comes to really close working relationship between the county and the various city councils. So warehouses, I think there's nothing intrinsically wrong with them, but I do think we've overextended ourselves in the warehouse sector, and we need to diversify. Crime. I mean, crime. These next three really go all together: crime, homelessness, and affordable housing. So, I know in areas like Redlands, in Highlands, homelessness and crime have been on the rise. The county has, from a top level, the county has allocated a decent chunk of money to addressing homelessness, but I think there have been some problems with their approach. So I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I want to say it was a $70 million allocation last year rather. Keep forgetting it's 2024, time is flying way too fast. But about a $70 million allocation to address homeless. During the time the county was spending that money, homelessness continued to increase. It was only recently that the county set up a committee to study the root causes of homelessness. And I think this has kind of identified a bigger problem in the county, which is, we are oftentimes spending money without necessarily knowing where it's going. And even in the last couple of weeks, I think this happened just last week or a few days ago, the state of California announced a new lawsuit against the county of San Bernardino County, among a couple of others, for homelessness funding from the state that was improperly spent. So for me, this all comes down to that bigger picture. Let's do a better job of managing and allocating the resources we have, and let's spend time really understanding the root causes of some of these problems before we just start throwing money at them. So one thing I like to talk about a lot is I know the best way to make sure that we've got a well-funded sheriff's department, a well-funded fire department, to make sure all of our first responders have the resources we need, is to make sure all these departments are well-resourced and well-funded. And I think the only way we're going to do that is with better financial management and financial oversight at the Board of Supervisors level. There's not a slide in here on it, but you might have read the news about the old county CEO who got ostensibly fired, but was allowed to resign about 6 months ago. From my perspective, I think it was a poorly structured agreement in the sense that this guy really caused a lot of damage internally, and then is continuing to get paid by the county. He even gets a raise while he's sitting in his garden. But what happened was he bullied employees, in particular female employees. We've heard reports of entire departments leaving just because of the toxic environment this guy created. So really, one of my main priorities, if elected to this seat, is cutting through some of this BS and really making sure that we've got a positive environment. We're keeping an eye on our purse strings and making sure that we're doing the best job we possibly can with the money that we've got. All this waste, all these lawsuits really need to stop because it's a big waste of time and attention, and it's got real problems for all of us. Any other questions on local priorities before we move on?
Not in the chat. You might just want to say hi to the people that have joined since the start.
Oh, that's a good point. So yeah, so anyone who's joined late or since the start, Just know that this entire recording will both get published both to Facebook and to YouTube after it's done, and we've got a few more dates coming up. So we've got another 2 focused on Redlands, Highland, Mentone. We've got some for Yucaipa. I mean, we're doing these literally 3 times a week across the whole district. So if you feel like you've missed out and you want to join another one, feel free to jump in anytime. And please tell all your friends and family to come as well. So we've just been talking about both countywide and local priorities. And now let me tell you just a little bit about me and why I'm doing this. So I am a Southern California native. I grew up outside of LA in a neighborhood called Topanga, if that means anything to anyone, but I've had a lifelong connection to San Bernardino County. So I am talking to you from my living room here, and I live now in a house that my grandparents built 50 years ago. So I live up near Lake Arrowhead in a little village called Sky Forest, so an unincorporated part of San Bernardino County, which is really important for my motivation for doing this. And I've been around the block a little bit. So I grew up outside of LA. I went to USC, and then in the finance career I talked about earlier, I spent most of that living in London actually. So I was in London for better part of 12 years. Met my husband, who is operating the computer there while I was over there, and then decided I want to come back to California just to get back to the sunshine. But I think what that means is I've got a really broad base of experience, both from a personal perspective and a work perspective. At this point in my career, I've done business in 5 continents. So I bring a really broad base of experience to this role that I don't think you're seeing from other candidates. And then personally, I like to, in my spare time, which I have none of right now because we are doing so many of these and running around campaigning, I like to cook, I like to tinker in my workshop. I'm just a normal guy. So why am I doing this? I never had any aspirations to be a politician. This was never my life plan, and this is not something that I've been planning for my entire life. And I think that's really important because my motivation here is really to do a better job taking care of our local community. So when I moved to San Bernardino County full-time about 4 years ago, being in an unincorporated part of the county, we started to realize how dysfunctional it can be. So for us, because we're in an unincorporated part of San Bernardino, our main interface with local government is directly with the county. So that's everything from pulling permits to open a business, improve your house, just to basic stuff like trash pickup. And being up here in Lake Arrowhead, we really realized how difficult the county can make life for some of the residents up here. And then for me, it really kicked off properly when we all got buried under 10, 12 feet of snow last winter. That's when I really realized that, the county, just if you read the news during that time, you might have seen how badly people struggled up here. We were all stuck in our houses for the better part of 2 weeks, and one thing that was really happening was that we just weren't hearing anything at all from the county in terms of what their plans were. So one of the things I did during that time was I led a whole coordinated campaign to get the attention of the person I'm now running against, really to get us some more resources and some better communication up here. So through that experience, I developed a relationship with Supervisor Rao, the person I'm now running against, a lot of the various heads of the county departments, and it was the first time I really realized that, actually I enjoyed the community service aspect of the role I was doing, and also I realized I had something to add in terms of my skill set into this role. So that's really kind of my why. Like I said, it was really this is in some ways a new thing for me. It was never part of my plan, and I think the important takeaway there is that I'm not bringing any political baggage with me. I haven't made any promises to anyone. A huge part of this campaign is that it's all grassroots. I'm not taking any corporate donations. So my main objective here is to do the best job I possibly can, taking care of the residents of San Bernardino County. And if quite frankly, if you look at the way some of the other campaigns are funded, you'll see a lot of corporate donations there, and I think it's important that we really start to separate that. So just to sum up on the presentation, and then I can answer any other questions. So just on me, look, I think I'm the most qualified candidate for this role. I think being being financially savvy is really important here because a huge part of this job is budgeting, allocating resources, and trying to get more resources from the state. That's going to be incredibly important going forward because we're in this budget deficit with California, and we need someone who can both negotiate to get more resources and also put us on a better foot in terms of our relationship. Like I said before, I was what was called a generalist investor. So my skill set is looking across a huge pool of companies, or in this case, county departments, being able to figure out quickly how they work and what they need to make them better. So a big part of my agenda in the first few months of this role is really spending, I spend a lot of time now with our county's budget, really going through in detail, looking across the various county departments, figuring out is there fat that can get cut, and what makes these departments work, what would make them work better. This is something that is a core skill set of mine that I spent the better part of 15 years developing. If you follow the campaign on social media in particular, you'll see I am the only candidate right now that is really talking about issues and giving a firm opinion on things. I've been doing this throughout the entire campaign, and it's really important to me that you as a voter get a preview of how I think and how I'm going to respond in various situations. So again, if you haven't done it already, follow the campaign on social media, and if you're finding any of that interesting, please share it with friends and family. And lastly, District 3 in San Bernardino is a huge place. And compared to all of the other candidates in particular, I think I've got a really good understanding and a really good feel for what it's like to be in these different places. So I live in the mountains now. We actually have a little bit of property in the desert, and I spend a bunch of time down there. And I've lived in cities like LA and London, so even though I haven't personally lived in Redlands or Highland, I know what it's like to be in a city, and I know the challenges faced by residents. So I'll break here for a second and see if there's any Q&A in the chat. We've got sometimes a 20-second delay, so it might take a second for stuff to come through.
While we wait for questions, maybe you could just talk a little bit. I know a lot of people are concerned about having someone on the board who just represents their city very well. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how it's better for everyone to have a supervisor who can take care of the whole county, because otherwise you end up with the cities doing well, the mountains and the desert not doing well, and then those two regions being a drain on resources that get taken away from the cities.
So the point is, we've engaged with so many residents across this district and across this county at this point, and it's not uncommon to get to various cities or various places where residents say, I want a county representative from Highland or Redlands or the mountains or the desert. And unfortunately, we're in a big district and a big county, and the way it's divided in some ways kind of is what it is. And I think the most important part is that we've got someone sitting in that seat who can empathize with what it's like to be a resident in all these three, or not these just three, but all these different places. And also, I think it's important that someone can really look across all these various cities and figure out what. Again, I'm going to keep coming back to this point of financial responsibility and resource allocation. How can we allocate resources among the various cities in the county to make sure that they are all well taken care of? So I know a lot of people are going to say that he's just doing this for the mountain communities. I mean, this is the nexus for me running, just given the experience we've had here. But I've spent so much time talking to people in the desert, to people in cities, and I'm really concerned about the whole district.
Okay, so we have kind of a joint question from Brian, who says, would you consider using social media to keep the locals up to date on government projects that you're working on? And then the sort of follow-up part of that from Robert is, would you consider a fireside chat style presence on social media?
Okay, so the question is, would I use social media to keep people updated on what's going on? Absolutely. So this is something I've already planned to do. I'd very much like to, if you like the kind of style of content that I put on social media now, this is very much what I would plan to continue doing if actually sitting in this seat. I think a huge problem we face in this county is there's not good communication between the county, sometimes the county and the cities, but certainly where we are, between the county and the residents. I think that's an easy problem to start to tackle anyway, and I think a big part of the way we can do that is through social media, fireside chats, et cetera, et cetera. Really, I'm committed to I'm going to call it, compared to what we've seen in this county before, an unparalleled level of transparency and honesty. And one thing that I will commit to you as a voter is whatever I'm doing on that board and whatever I'm doing sitting in that seat, I will keep you up to date on and tell you why I voted the way that I did. I think if we had a bit more background on the motivations behind how people have been voting recently, I think we'd be in a much better position.
A question from possibly Zoe's twin. Says, Highland resident here, how about street cleanup? The streets need to be repaved by people's homes instead of the islands that are being placed on green spots and things. So what can we do to like clean up streets, repave sidewalks and roads?
Yeah, okay, so the question is about infrastructure, paving streets, keeping roads clean. This is something you have my empathy and my sympathy with. We live up in the mountains. We have horrible roads that get frozen in winter, potholes all the time, and they can be a real mess. I'm going to keep hammering this point home. This all comes back to how the county allocates its resources and making sure everything is well funded. So as it relates to your streets in Highlands, I think this comes down to the relationship between Highland City Council and the County of San Bernardino, and making sure we find all the possible ways we can to get all of that funding from the state of California, and making sure that all the infrastructure we have in this county is maintained as well as it possibly can be. And by the way, I'm very, very familiar with the fact that even within the county, the way things are administered right now is not always equivalent between jurisdictions. I mean, even driving down, so we drive down Highway 18 to get down to the freeway whenever we leave home, and the second you hit the city of San Bernardino, the roads are different. So I think this all comes down to effective relationships with city managers and city councils, and making sure everyone's got the resources they need to do their job well. Yeah, so the point is even within the city of Highland, we're aware of a lot of the discrepancies between East and West Highland, and I think it's unfortunate that we're in that situation right now. And I think the county could. Well, one thing I would want to do as a supervisor is get more involved in I'm not going to say in the day-to-day operations of the cities, but do what I can to help facilitate the various cities in the county doing a better job for everybody. That's another good point, which is that the county oftentimes has access to state grants and federal grants that cities don't, and a big part of this job is figuring out where those grants should get allocated and which cities need them most.
I think that's it for the questions.
Okay, so I think it sounds like that's it for Q&A right now, but look, even though we're about to finish up the town hall, know that you can always find us on social media. You can find us on our website, smithforsb.com, and we've got a phone number and email there. So anytime you've got a question, please feel free to reach out. If you are, of course, I'd love your support on March 5th. Just so you know, ballots will drop in the mail in the next few weeks. They should be in your mailbox around February 5th. So obviously, we're hoping to earn your support for the primary in March. If you are at all interested in anything we've had to say today, like I said, this is a totally grassroots campaign, so any support is very much appreciated. There's a QR code here on the slide. There's also a donation button on the website. And if you haven't spent time on the website yet, go through and spend some time, because we've got a really solid outline of issues, our plan for how to tackle them, and compared to all the other campaigns, we're spending a lot of time really making sure we address the issues that we have in this county. I'm really committed to trying to make this place as good as it possibly can be. So thank you so much for your time tonight, tuning in. If you found it useful, please let your friends and family know. We're going to do plenty of these over the next few weeks. Details are posted on social media, and they'll be on the website soon. And in the meantime, we're here for any questions. So thanks, everyone. Good night, and enjoy the rest of your evening.